Alright, this is part 2 of the Airframe written test bank. This is going to be questions 150 to 350, 450, we'll see. Starting with 150. The length of a rivet to be used to join a sheet of 0.032 inch 32nd thousandths and 0.064 inch 64 thousandth aluminum alloy should be equal to 1.5 times the rivet diameter plus 96 thousandths of an inch. What is generally the best procedure to use when removing a solid shank rivet? Drill to the base of the manufactured rivet head with a drill one size smaller than the rivet shank and remove the rivet with a punch. Joggles in removed rivet shanks would indicate partial shear failure. Joggles in rivet shanks due to shear failure would get replaced by which of the following? A larger solid replacement rivet. What type of loads cause the most rivet failures? Shear. Which rivet is used for riveting magnesium alloy structures? 5606 aluminum. Which rivet is used for riveting nickel steel alloys? Monel. The length of rivet to be chosen when making a structural repair that involves the joining of 32 thousandths inch and 64 thousandths inch aluminum sheet drilled with a number 30 drill is 5/16 inch. That's the second time they used 5/16 inch for a rivet question on this test bank. Referring to figure 4, the length of flat A is 3.750 inches. Referring to figure 4, the amount of material required to make the 90-degree bend is 0.3436 inch. Referring to figure 5, what is the length of flat A? 3.7 inches. Referring to figure 5, what is the flat layout dimension? 6.8 inches. If a streamlined cover plate is to be hand formed using a form block, a piece of dead soft aluminum should first be placed over the hollow portion of the mold and securely fastened in place. The bumping operation should be started by tapping the aluminum lightly around the edges and gradually working down into the center. A piece of flat stock that is to be bent to a closed angle of 15 degrees must be bent through an angle of 165 degrees. When a piece of aluminum alloy is to be bent using minimum radius for the type and thickness of material, the layout should be made so that the bend will be 90 degrees to the grain of the sheet. The flat layout or blank length of a piece of metal from which a simple L-shaped bracket 3 inches by 1 inch is to be bent depends upon the radius of the desired bend. The bracket which will require the greatest amount of material is one which has a bend radius of 1/8 inch. If it is necessary to compute a bend allowance problem and bend allowance tables are not available, the neutral axis of the bend can be found by adding approximately 1/2 of the stock thickness to the bend radius. Unless otherwise specified, the radius of a bend is the inside radius of the metal being formed. The sharpest bend that can be placed in a piece of metal without critically weakening the part is called the minimum radius of the bend. The most important factors needed to make a flat pattern layout are radius, thickness, and degree of bend. A piece of sheet metal is bent to a certain radius. The curvature of the bend is referred to as the bend radius. You can distinguish between aluminum and aluminum alloy by testing with a 10% solution of caustic soda. The purpose of a joggle is to allow clearance for a sheet or an extrusion. When bending metal, the material on the outside of the curve stretches while the material on the inside of the curve compresses. That part of the material which is not affected by either stress is the neutral line. Referring to Figure 6, determine the dimensions of A, B, and C in the flat layout with a setback of 0.252 and a bend allowance of 0.345. The answer, 4.182. The sight line on a sheet metal flat layout to be bent in a cornice or box brace is measured and marked 1 radius from the bend tangent line that is placed under the brake. Referring to Figure 7, what is dimension F? 5.936. On a sheet metal fitting layout with a single bend, allow for stretching by subtracting the setback from both legs. The aluminum alloys used in aircraft construction are usually hardened by which method? Heat treatment. In gas tungsten arc welding, a stream of inert gas is used to prevent the formation of oxides in the puddle. Which statement best describes magnesium welding? Filler rod should be the same composition as base metal. Which statement best describes magnesium welding? It can be welded successfully using the same type of joints that are used for aluminum. Which statement is true in regard to welding heat-treated magnesium? The welded section does not have the strength of the original metal. The oxyacetylene flame for silver soldering should be neutral. Why is it necessary to use flux in all silver soldering operations? To chemically clean the base metal of oxide film. Engine mount members should preferably be repaired by using a larger diameter tube with fish mouth and rosette welds. What method of repair is recommended for a steel tube longeron dented at a cluster? welded patch plate. Welding over brazed or soldered joints is not permitted. Which statement concerning soldering is correct? Joints in electric wire to be soldered should be mechanically secure prior to soldering. Silver, tin, and lead are used in electrical soldering joints for which reason? Corrosion properties. A resurfaced soldering iron cannot be used effectively until after the working face has been tinned. Which of the following can normally be welded without adversely affecting strength? SAE 4130 chrome molybdenum tubing. In selecting a torch tip size to use in welding, the size of the tip opening determines the amount of heat applied to the work. Why should a carburizing flame be avoided when welding steel? It hardens the surface. The most important considerations when selecting welding rod is/are material compatibility. When selecting a welding rod, one of the most important factors to consider is to ensure that the proper AMS number is used. The oxyacetylene flame used for aluminum welding should be neutral and soft. A very thin and pointed tip when soldering copper is undesirable because it will cool too rapidly. Filling or grinding a weld bead is considered to be a way to bring about strength reduction in joint. Acetyling at a line pressure above 15 psi is dangerously unstable. When moving acetylene tanks, what precautions should be observed? Transport upright. Cylinders used to transport and store acetylene contain acetone. A welding torch backfire may be caused by a loose tip. Which statement concerning a welding process is true? The inert arc welding process uses an inert gas to protect the weld from the atmosphere. Where should the flux be applied when oxyacetylene welding aluminum? Painted on the surface to be welded and applied to the welding rod. What purpose does flux serve in welding aluminum? Minimizes or prevents oxidation. Why are aluminum plates 1/4 inch or more thick usually preheated before welding? Reduces internal stress and assures more complete penetration. How should a welding torch flame be adjusted to weld stainless steel? Slightly carburizing. Oxides form very rapidly when alloys or metals are hot. It is important, therefore, when welding aluminum to use a flux. In gas welding, the amount of heat applied to the material being welded is controlled by size of the tip opening. When welding or cutting, the acetylene pressure gauge should never be set higher than 15 psi. Oxygen and acetylene cylinders are made of steel. High pressure cylinders used to transport and store acetylene must contain acetone. When a butt welded joint is visually inspected for penetration, the penetration should be 100% of the thickness of the base metal. Annealing of aluminum removes stresses caused by forming. Edge notching is generally recommended in butt welding above a certain thickness of aluminum because it aids in getting full penetration of the metal and prevents local distortion. If too much acetylene is used in the welding of stainless steel, the metal will absorb carbon and lose its resistance to corrosion. The shielding gases generally used in the gas tungsten arc GTA welding of aluminum consist of helium or argon, or a mixture of helium and argon. The auxiliary tail rotor of a helicopter permits the pilot to compensate for and/or accomplish which of the following? Torque and directional control. The vertical flight of a helicopter is controlled by collective pitch changes. A reduction in anti-torque thrust will cause the tail to pivot in the direction of torque rotation around the main rotor axis. A decrease in pitch angle of the tail rotor blades on a helicopter. Tail to pivot in the direction of torque rotation around the main rotor axis. In rotorcraft external loading, the ideal location of the cargo release is where the line of action passes through the center of gravity at all times. The acute angle formed by the chord line of a wing and the relative wind is known as the angle of attack. A helicopter in forward flight cruise configuration changes direction by tilting the main rotor disc in the desired direction. The purpose in checking main rotor blade tracking is to determine the relative position of the blades during rotation. In a hovering helicopter equipped with a tail rotor, directional control is maintained by varying the pitch of the tail rotor blades. If a single rotor helicopter is in the forward horizontal flight, the angle of attack of the advancing blade is less than the retreating blade. Main rotor blades that do not cone by the same amount during rotation are said to be out of track. One purpose of the freewheeling unit required between the engine and helicopter transmission is to automatically disengage the rotor from the engine in case of an engine failure. Which statement is correct concerning torque effect on helicopters? Torque direction is the opposite of rotor blade rotation. What is the purpose of the freewheeling unit in helicopter drive system? It disengages the engine from the main rotor when the engine RPM is less than the rotor RPM. Movement about the longitudinal axis roll in a helicopter is affected by the movement of the cyclic pitch control. Movement about the lateral axis, pitch, in a helicopter is affected by the movement of the cyclic pitch control. Wing dihedral, a rigging consideration on most airplanes of conventional design, contributes most to the stability of the airplane about its longitudinal axis. Other than the manufacturer maintenance manual, what other document could be used to determine the primary flight control surface deflection for an imported aircraft that is reassembled after shipment? Aircraft Type Certificate Datasheet. If a pilot reports that an airplane flies left wing heavy, this condition may be corrected by increasing the angle of incidence of the left wing or decreasing the angle of incidence of the right wing, or both. If the vertical fin of a single-engine propeller-driven airplane is rigged properly, it will generally be parallel to the vertical axis, but not the longitudinal axis. An airplane which has good longitudinal stability should have a minimum tendency to pitch. As the angle of attack of an airfoil increases, the center of pressure will move toward the leading edge. The angle of incidence is that acute angle formed by a line parallel to the wing chord and a line parallel to the longitudinal axis of the aircraft. An airplane's center of lift is usually located aft of its center of gravity, so that the airplane will have a nose-heavy tendency. An airplane is controlled directionally about its vertical axis by the rudder. The elevators of a conventional airplane are used to provide rotation about the lateral axis. Washing in the left wing of a monoplane for purposes of rigging corrections after flight test will have what effect on the lift and drag of that wing? Both drag and lift will increase due to increased angle of attack. What type of flap system increases the wing area and changes the wing camber? Fowler flaps. If the right wing of a monoplane is improperly rigged to a greater angle of incidence than designated in the manufacturer's specifications, it will cause the airplane to be off balance both laterally and directionally. The chord of a wing is measured from leading edge to trailing edge. When the lift of an airfoil increases, the drag will also increase. What physical factors are involved in the aspect ratio of airplane wings? Span and chord. Improper rigging of the elevator trim tab system will affect the balance of the airplane about its lateral axis. An airplane that has a tendency to gradually increase in pitching moment that has been set into motion has poor longitudinal stability. The purpose of a wing slats is to reduce stalling speed. The angle of incidence of an airplane at rest does not change when in flight. Buffeting is the intermittent application of forces to a part of an airplane. It is caused by an unsteady flow from turbulence. Movement of an airplane along its lateral axis, roll, is also movement around or about the longitudinal axis controlled by the ailerons. The primary purpose of stall strips fence is to stall the inboard portion of the wings first. If all or a significant part of a stall strip is missing on an airplane wing, a likely result will be asymmetrical lateral control at or near stall angles of attack. Rigging and alignment checks should not be undertaken in the open. However, if this cannot be avoided, the aircraft should be positioned with the nose into the wind. The correct dihedral angle can be determined by using a dihedral board and bubble level along the front spar of each wing. The dihedral angle of a wing may be measured by placing a straight edge and level protractor on the front spar. Where would you find precise information to perform a symmetry alignment check for a particular aircraft? Aircraft Service or Maintenance Manual. Where is the buttock line or butt line of an aircraft? A width measurement left or right of and parallel to the vertical center line. Where is fuselage station number 137 located? 137 inches aft of the zero or fixed reference line. Proper wing twist in a sheet metal constructed wing can usually be checked by utilizing a bubble level and special fixtures described by the manufacturer. The vast majority of aircraft control cables are terminated with swaged terminals that must be checked with a go, no-go gauge before and after to show compliance with the manufacturer's requirements after the swaging operation. What non-destructive checking method is normally used to ensure that the correct amount of swaging has taken place when installing swaged type terminals on aircraft control cable? Use a terminal gauge to check the diameter of the swaged portion of the terminal. When inspecting a control cable turnbuckle for proper installation, determine that the safety wire ends are wrapped a minimum of 4 turns around the terminal end shanks. Safety wire of 0.020 inch diameter may be used on parts having a nominal hole diameter of 0.045 inch and 0.062 inch with a spacing between the parts of 2 inches. If all instructions issued by the swaging tool manufacturer are followed when swaging a cable terminal, the resultant swage terminal strength should be the full rated strength of the cable. Which is an acceptable safety device for a castle nut when installed on secondary structures? Cotter pin. When installing a castle nut, start alignment with the cotter pin hole at the minimum recommended torque plus friction drag torque. When used in close proximity to magnetic compasses, cotter pins are made of what material? Corrosion resisting steel. When a fiber or nylon insert type self-locking nut can be threaded on a bolt or stud through the insert with only the fingers, it should be rejected. The purpose of a vertical fin is to provide directional stability. How are the changes in direction of a control cable accomplished? Pulleys. What is the smallest size cable that may be used in aircraft primary control systems? 1/8 inch. After repairing or recovering a rudder, the surface should be rebalanced to manufacturer's specifications. Placing a piece of cloth around a stainless steel control cable and running it back and forth over the length of the cable is generally a satisfactory method of inspecting for broken strands. The cable-operated control system of an all-metal aircraft, not incorporating a temperature-compensating device, has been rigged to correct tension in a heated hangar. If the aircraft is operated in very cold weather, the cable tension will decrease when the aircraft structure and cables become cold. Very often, repairs to a control surface require static rebalancing of the control surface. Generally, flight control's balance condition may be determined by the behavior of the trailing edge when the surface is suspended from its hinge points. Excessive wear on both of the sides of a control cable pulley groove is as evidence of pulley misalignment. Fair lead should never deflect the alignment of a cable more than 3 degrees. Where does the breakage of control cable wires occur most frequently? Breakage usually occurs where the cables pass over the pulleys and through fair leads. With which system is differential control associated? Aileron. Which statement concerning the 100-hour inspection of an airplane equipped with a push-pull tube type control system is true? The threaded rod ends should be checked for the amount of thread engagement by means of the inspection hole provided. If control cables are adjusted properly and the control surfaces tend to vibrate, the probable cause is worn attachment fittings. Aircraft flight control trim systems must be designed and installed so that the pilot can determine the relative position of the trim tab from the cockpit. Stability about the axis which runs parallel to the line of flight is referred to as lateral stability. The purpose of spring tabs or servo tabs is to assist the pilot in moving the control surfaces. If the control stick of an aircraft with properly rigged flight controls is moved rearward and to the left, the right aileron will move down and the elevator will move up. Movement of the cockpit flight deck control toward the nose down position during a ground operational check of the elevator trim tab will cause the trailing edge of the trim tab to move in which direction? Upward, regardless of elevator position. If the control stick of an aircraft with properly rigged flight controls is moved forward and to the right, the left aileron will move down and the elevator will move down. If the travel of an airplane's controls is correct but the cables are rigged exceptionally tight, what probable effect will this have when flying the airplane? An airplane will be heavy on the controls. During inspection of the flight control system of an airplane equipped with differential type aileron control, side-to-side movement of the control stick will cause each aileron to have a greater up travel from the streamlined position than down travel. A universal propeller protractor used to measure the degrees of aileron travel should be zeroed with the aileron in the neutral position. The universal propeller protractor can be used to measure degrees of flap travel. Identify the cable that is used in primary control systems and in other places where operation over pulleys is frequent. 3. A tension regulator in the flight control cable system of a large all-metal aircraft is used primarily to retain a set tension. Referring to Figure 9, when the outside air temperature is 80 degrees Fahrenheit, select the acceptable 3/16 cable tension range. 117 pounds minimum, 143 pounds maximum. Differential control on an aileron system means that the up travel is more than the down travel. Why is it generally necessary to jack an aircraft indoors for weighing, so that air currents do not destabilize the scales? When tying a small aircraft down, which statement is true? Make sure the aircraft is pointed into the wind. What speed should you tow an aircraft? Rate of the wing walkers. What should be accomplished before jacking an aircraft? Install critical stress panels / plates. Which statement about airworthiness directives, ADs, is true? Compliance with an AD is mandatory and must be recorded in the maintenance records. Airworthiness directives, ADs, are designed to notify aircraft owners and other interested persons of unsafe conditions and prescribes the condition under which the product may continue to be operated. When overhauling electrical equipment, all necessary information should be obtained from maintenance instructions published by the aircraft and/or equipment manufacturer. Which statement is correct regarding an aircraft that is found to be unairworthy after an annual inspection due to an item requiring a major repair, assuming approved data is used to accomplish the repair? An appropriately rated mechanic may accomplish the repair, and an IA may approve the aircraft for return to service. After an annual inspection is performed, any defects found must be listed and provided to the owner, and kept for how long? Until the defects are corrected. Radio equipment installations made in accordance with supplemental type certificate data require approval for return to service by the holder of an inspection authorization. An aircraft may be flown beyond the 100-hour inspection requirement to reach a place where the inspection can be accomplished, provided it does not exceed 10 flight hours. Where would you find the recommended statement for recording the approval or disapproval for return to service of an aircraft after a 100-hour or annual inspection? 14 CFR FAR Part 43. What federal aviation regulation, FAR, defines airworthiness? FAR Part 3. Which maintenance record entry best describes the action taken for a control cable showing approximately 20% wear on several of the individual outer wires at a fair lead? Wear within acceptable limits, repair not necessary. An aircraft owner was provided a list of discrepancies on an aircraft that was not approved for return to service after an annual inspection. Which of the following statements is/are true concerning who may correct the discrepancies? 1. Only a mechanic with an IA. 2. An appropriately rated mechanic. 3. Any certified repair station. The answer is 2. An appropriately rated mechanic. The maximum time a 100-hour inspection may be extended is 10 hours. Which statement is correct when an aircraft has not been approved for return to service after an annual inspection because of several items requiring minor repair? An appropriately rated mechanic may repair the defects and approve the aircraft for return to service. An aircraft that is due an annual inspection may be flown if a special permit has been issued for the aircraft. For an individual, not a repair station, to conduct a complete 100-hour inspection on an aircraft and approve it for return to service requires a mechanic certificate with an Airframe and power plant ratings. Where would you find the operating conditions that make a 100-hour inspection mandatory? 14 CFR FAR Part 91. Large airplanes and turbine-powered multi-engine airplanes operated 14 CFR FAR Part 91 General Operating and Flight Rules must be inspected in accordance with an inspection program authorized under 14 CFR FAR Part 91 Subpart E. Exposure to and/or storage near which of the following is considered harmful to aircraft tires? Fuel, oil, ozone, electrical equipment, hydraulic fluid, and solvents. What would be the effect if the piston return spring broke in a brake master cylinder? The brakes would drag.